I see my microphone is working, that's good. So yeah, as Charlotte already said, I'm Tristan. I will skip this slide, and I'm the ML tribe lead for Devoteam. I have quite some experience with Document AI in specific, and we will take a look at that today. So Document AI, I'll explain a bit what it is, how most businesses use it, and I'll try to show a brief little demo at the end. I know most sessions haven't done that yet, but in the end, Document AI is something that can be used in all businesses, right? Every business has documents. If you don't think you have any, then you probably haven't talked to your back office yet or something. So what exactly is Document AI? Document AI is basically a Google solution that targets that specific idea, right? Everyone has documents, whether you're a media company, retail company, in industry, financial services, those all have documents. Of course, in finance, you can imagine you'll probably have a bit more, but still, even things like the legal sector, they have a lot of contracts we can extract information from. It really is very prevalent across all different industries. Every business process, well, nearly all of them, either begin or end with a document, right? You have something that's either a delivery, for example, it can be a contract, it can be an invoice, that basically means you made a purchase and did a checkout. All of that contains a bunch of information which can be hard to leverage. That's called unstructured information, and ideally, you would like to be able to transform it into structured information, where you can basically go to a database and say, this document that I had, what was in it, right? That's something that can be hard if it's just a PDF, for example. How is that currently done in most businesses? Well, it's kind of a manual process often, which means that there are people, they need to take the document, they print it out, they either annotate it, they put that in a database, or the other way around, they need to scan it and upload it somewhere, and then someone else manually extracts the information from that to put it in your back office system, for example. This, as you can imagine, mostly takes up quite a lot of time, which costs money if you're a business, and is of course not what you want to have happen. There are multiple workflows for documents. You have your back office invoicing, but you can also send out your own invoices to your customers. Each of those needs to be treated differently. Other people need to see them, approve them. It can become quite complex to manage. In essence, that means that you have high costs, which means you can also have lost revenue or missed opportunities just by being too slow. That's exactly where Document AI comes in. So it takes that unstructured information and transforms it using AI into structured information. What kind of? Well, everything, basically. So I will talk now specifically about Document AI, but you can do the same for images using Vision AI, videos using the Video Intelligence API. Google has a lot of these managed services that you can really do a lot with. And all of them mostly have the aim to take your information and make it so that you can actually use it in your business. Nice thing about these tools as well is that they're relatively low effort to set up and maintain. A business does not necessarily need to have a lot of ML engineering experience to be able to use it. In the end, it's just an API call, but it is quite important to know how to evaluate it properly. Because it's a machine learning model, you always have to start by knowing that it will never be 100% accurate. That's just not a realistic expectation. These models are statistical. It means that there is always a probability that they're wrong, and you have to take that into account. That's something that can be a bit of a shift from the traditional way of working, where you normally assume that the people you have working on it actually are 100% accurate, even though that's not always the case as well. So, how do most businesses use it? Well, there's normally 3 steps in this process. So, you have your documents somewhere. Mostly physical documents, but it can also be, for example, that we've seen customers getting PDF invoices on a specific email address, for example. You get these documents in a bunch of different places. In general, to be able to use them with Document AI, you need to bring them into Google Cloud Platform. So there's a bunch of different ways of doing that, but that's always the first step. As soon as they're there, it's relatively easy to get your prediction. From there, you actually have to process the document. That mostly means that you have to choose which tools from the toolbox that you want to use. And as you can see from this slide, and I'll show in the demo later, there are quite a lot. So you can, for example, give a PDF and ask Google to return you the splits where you think that there are actually different documents inside of one PDF. This can happen when you have an invoice and an appendix or a contract with multiple different sections. You can ask for those to be split and then treat each of them separately. You can also see is this document even good enough to be processed? It's also a use case where you say this document is actually just a very poor picture, for example. We cannot look at it, we cannot extract information from it, please do it again. Those are kind of the preparation step. Then you need to know at this document, what type of document is it? Sometimes you already do. Sometimes you can say this is an invoice, we know it because of the process it's being ran through, but you don't always. You can also have, and in fact, there are people using document AI, startups, that actually just do this as a service, where you have an application where you can upload any number of documents, it splits them, classifies them, and nicely organizes them. That in itself is already a big added value for a company in that process of organizing their information. Once you have that, though, is where the real added value can begin, where you can start helping people to work faster in their job, right? That's where entity extraction comes in, where you say, I have an invoice. What are fields on an invoice that I normally want to have? I want to have who is a supplier, what's the total price on the invoice, what's the delivery address, for example, if you're shipping something. All that information comes back on an invoice, and Google knows that and has a model specifically for invoices. The same goes for utility bills. The same goes for contracts. It has a very specific data model for each document where it can extract that information for you. Of course, those entities, they have relationships with each other, and that Google uses that in a smart way behind the scenes to be able to detect what is the actual information in the document. Good. From there, of course, you have that information then most of the times on Google Cloud, on cloud storage, but you can also just have it as a real-time API. To be able to consume it as a business, you need to push it back into whatever system you're using. So you can either build something yourself, it's quite effort intensive, but there's a lot of customers that use, for example, SAP, ServiceNow, those types of services in order to be able to immediately use that information again in their business processes. One other option, you can go to BigQuery and you can start doing analytics. That's also something very interesting. You can start to, for example, look at, okay, how many invoices am I getting from each customer? Do maybe some customers invoice each other? Things like that can be very interesting, and that's why pushing it into BigQuery, it's very cheap and a very good way to move your business forward. Good. So here I have some example workflows just to show you, you can do very different things with it. And in the end, Document AI is an API call, but you have to think quite consciously about how do we integrate with it, because there is always a workflow, there is always a business process. This one is a very simple example. Well, simple. I won't go into all of these GCP services. This slide is a bit overloaded, mostly just to say, okay, look, there's quite a lot of stuff that comes in using Document AI in a production sense. But this workflow is very simple. There is an end user. He uploads a document. He scans it in from PDF into a PDF. He sends that over to a backend that you have, which then sends it, in this case, to something in GCP, which will take care of routing everything to DocAI. In this case, mostly what will happen is we are assuming we will get utility bills from the process. We know that. So we send everything to the utility parser. The utility parser will basically extract things like, okay, we have these meters. So utility bill is your consumption for electricity, for example. It will say, okay, this is the meter that we are currently reading. This is the value on the meter. This is how much has been consumed. Things like that. That's all normally on an invoice you get from your electricity provider, for example. From there, it puts it on cloud storage, as we said. Now, as I said, it's very important to understand that these models are not 100% accurate and never will be. That is why Google also proactively offers a service for that called Human in the Loop, which is basically a platform where you can correct these different mistakes. You can either do that with your own people in your own company that go to that portal and resolve these things, or you can actually work with Google to take their labelers and use them as resources to correct those mistakes. How that works exactly is basically through a confidence score. So a machine learning model, when it returns information, it can also give you an estimate of how confident it is about that information. For example, it can say, I'm 90% sure this is a supplier name, but I'm not that sure about the address here. That might be something that needs to be validated. That's something that you can say, okay, he's not that confident, I'm going to send it to Human in the Loop and let them check it out. It's kind of a trade-off between how much do we want to have processed by Human in the Loop? Do we just want to send everything there anyway? It will still have an added benefit because those people can work faster. Or do I just assume, do I rely on the confidence score and do I accept the fact that sometimes I might be a bit mistaken? That's also expectation management towards your own customers. From there, we assume, okay, we have correct information, and we send that into ServiceNow, in this case, to be treated in the rest of the business process. Good. But document AI can also be used for a completely different workflow, where you say, okay, this is kind of what I explained before, where a document comes in, it can be anything. Any PDF can have multiple documents, so we split them, we classify them, we label them with a very generic processor that I'll show later, which is called the form parser. And from there, we send the information back, in this case not to ServiceNow, but just to a different application in the enterprise stack. That's also very possible. So you should really see document AI just as a toolbox of different models that you can use depending on your use case. And really that integration is one where we as a partner can provide value, but also where for you most of the actual implementation work will be. Cool. Okay. This is Unifiedpost. We have already talked about them a couple of times today. Some of them are also here. They are a document digitization company. So basically their product is meant for businesses to be able to digitize all their documents and, for example, send invoices to their own customers, receive invoices from customers, and handle all of that very smoothly without having to do a lot of manual work. So the Unifiedpost actually uses document AI to, for example, when you receive an invoice, automatically tell you, hey, this is what's on the invoice. You can immediately check out from here, for example. They have a lot of clients. They have even more employees, and as you can see, their volume is quite high. So they are at 400 million documents a year, of which 50 million are invoices. It's quite significant. They are growing very, very quickly. I hope this slide is not too out of date, but I know that it changes quite rapidly. And these high volumes is really what makes document AI so powerful. If you want to deploy an ML model that serves this many documents with this much reliability, it's very hard. So that's where document AI as a managed service can help you meet your targets on that front. So yeah, they were growing very quickly. They didn't really want to have a bunch of human people just labeling everything, and their solution, it was good, but still they wanted to have it even better, because even a small improvement in the amounts of documents they need to process manually is huge when you compare it on the fact that they have 50 million invoices a year, right? If we can take, for example, 1% of those less that they need to label, that's huge human effort, huge cost saving. And that's where document AI comes in. So we created a solution together with them, which is basically that kind of workflow thing, but including some things like monitoring of the performance of the recognition of the model and things like that. And we now have an architecture that we know can scale up to 1 billion invoices a year, which is, gives them a little bit of margin of growth, but we're confident that we can adapt accordingly. They're using human in the loop. They're making their models smarter. I'll come back to that later. And this really gives them a huge improvement in terms of the recognition rate, which then leads to a lot of lower costs because they have less human labeling. And scalability-wise, it's a huge improvement in over the previous solution that they had in place. Cool. So with that being said, I will immediately hop into the GCP console. So if the good friend there in the back would share my screen, that would be very handy. Good. I'm still extending, I believe. Like this. Hopefully. I don't know if you have a different source. It takes a while. Okay, apologies. Good. So this is the GCP console for those who have not seen it yet. It should be pretty straightforward. And I'm right now in the document AI control panel. So this is where you can create your processors, do everything. Of course, you can also do that via the API. But I just want to show you a bit the list of processors and how they are structured. So when I click Create Processor, and if you are already using GCP or not, you can really try this very easily at home. So if you want to see, would this work for my use case, get a first idea, it's very easy to do so. So I highly encourage you. What we see here is 3 general processors. What does general mean? It means they work for any document. It doesn't matter what kind of document you have. You can just go there. Document OCR will return you all the text on the document, regardless of what it is. Document splitter will try to split the document into logical boundaries based on layouts of pages and things like that to see which ones might be of a different class. And then the form parser, I already explained, tries to extract key value pairs. So this one, it can end tables and things like that. So it's structured content from a document. This one, it's important to know the type of document you're processing to see if that would be possible. For example, if you have a form where it says name, Tristan, last name, Van Thielen, things like that, it's very good at. If you just have that as like plain text somewhere, it probably is not the parser for you. However, we come to the specialized processors, and this is really where the huge value is. Basically, what is this? This is Google saying, hey, we see a lot of customers need these types of processors, and we have them pre-built specifically for you. So for example, we can have a payslip parser, which will extract information specific to payslips and is trained specifically for that. We have the contract parser, as I already mentioned, expenses, invoice parser, which is one we'll be looking a bit more at in depth today. And we also have splitter classifiers for specific groups of documents, basically. So you can have lending, you can have procurement, which can then say, yeah, this is an invoice, this is an expense, things like that. Cool. Now, of course, it might be that you say, hey, my use case isn't on this list. There are, I think, 50 or something, but still, you can imagine there are a lot of different model types. And this is where custom models come in. So these custom models, it's using AutoML. For those who are not familiar with that, basically AutoML is low-code, no-code machine learning, where you as an end user just need to provide training data, labeled training data, and Google will train a model for you. This is something that we have seen some customers have big success with because of the fact that they can just provide their training data and the model trains specifically on that. Really makes a big difference compared to just training on a totally different data set and then training and then trying to predict on your own set of documents. Benefit here is also that you can decide yourself what it extracts from the document. So you can say, hey, this is exactly the information I want to get from each of my documents. Cool. So if I want to create one, I just click one. However, like in a professional kitchen show, I already have some ready. And so, for example, I can go to this OCR parser here, and I can upload a test document. I'll be using the same one everywhere. You might not be able to tell it by the way I look, but I bought a home gym, and this is the invoice from it. So you can see this is the OCR. It doesn't know the structure of this document. It doesn't know this is an invoice. So it's just extracting all the information with bounding boxes about where that information is on the document. And that kind of is already useful, especially for people that are more ML savvy. They might use this and then train their own ML model on this data. Right? For most businesses, this is useful for example, making, let's say, a searchable database of documents where you want to be able to search through this text. But yeah, it's not exactly what you want to have, as you can imagine. I can zoom in here a little bit, maybe. Good. So that's already valuable. To be honest, the form parser I haven't even tried on this document, but let's do it anyway. And you will see that for this type of document, it doesn't work that well, because it's not really meant for this type of document. But we'll probably be able to see some key value pairs being extracted. Yeah, good. So here, and this is exactly what it does work well on. You can see that it's really getting this order date is the 7th of December, order number it's this, because that's really the key value pairs that it's looking for, right? Good. But let's go to the one that will actually work, which is the invoice parser, because in the end, this is an invoice. You can see that this is a bit more recent of a version. I have to go to a different panel here, but the same thing still holds. And I can upload my invoice. And this is exactly, well, not exactly, you don't want to manually upload everything here, but this is the same as doing an API call to the document AI processor. And you can basically see here everything it is extracting. Good. I think this is also a bit of an older version than the one that's currently the most recent, but still, it should give us a good idea. So you can see here, what is it doing? It's going here and it's saying, okay, this is Rogue Fitness Europe. It's a supplier name, pretty obvious. It has my address here as the address that you need to ship to. It has all of these different, what are called line items. And for each of those, I can see, okay, this is the product code, this is the description, this is how many that were ordered, this is the unit price, and this is the total. And it goes down, and then here we have the total amounts, and you can see that all of that's nicely labeled. Okay, well, as I said at the start, no machine learning model is perfect. So I believe if I go to the next page, I'll see here that, for example, my email is the supplier email. Now, of course, that's not really correct. So what would we do here? We would basically say, okay, the supplier email, there's a couple of options. We can either look at the confidence score of the model. which hopefully in this case would be low because it's wrong. So it would say I'm only 30% confident that this is the supplier name, the supplier email, sorry. And we could then send that to human in the loop and it would correct it. Or, and this is actually a very powerful use case, but it requires a bit more work, we could check in, for example, our own database that we have Rogue Europe and what the normal email associated with that is. And we could then say, yeah, that's not correct, we send it to human in the loop. Now, that might seem challenging, and it is. But the nice thing is that actually Google is already doing that for you. And that's something that you can see here. So we see here at the top where it says, okay, this is what's on the document. And it's extracting that correctly. But actually, for Google, the normal company name is just Rogue Europe. Okay? And they will say that, and they will say, okay, according to Google, this is the company name. It's not Rogue Europe, Rogue Fitness Europe OY. And that's called their knowledge graph. So that's a very powerful feature they have, and you can see they do the same here for address. So they say here, okay, it's in Finland, and actually I know in the more recent version, it now updates and actually does find this one, but still it's the same idea. Here it's correcting it to Rogue Europe, which is normally actually in Belgium, in Bornem, which is their main base in Europe, but I believe that's now been changed. And it does some similar things for normalization here, so it normalizes numbers, it normalizes dates, things like that are very nice to have. Because otherwise that can become a mess in your backend if you have to, for example, to figure out is this an American date or European date and things like that. Google does that for you. Very nice. Okay. So I mentioned that it makes mistakes sometimes and things like that. There are some features on the roadmap that are actually quite nice for that. So one thing is that Google wants to allow you to have your own knowledge graph integrated with this. So actually, instead of just checking the Google one, it will also check your own knowledge graph, the enterprise knowledge graph, and you will be able to see, okay, in my business, this is probably the more likely outcome. That's a very nice feature. And that's here. You can also now start from, for example, the Google invoice parser and train it on your own dataset. That's something that's called uptraining. And that's really quite powerful, because this really dramatically boosts performance. So we have seen customers go up to 96, 98% F1 score, which is a metric that combines the accuracy, the precision and the recall, but I won't go too much into detail there. But that's really a very good result. That's something that you would not expect from such a low amount of effort that you have to put in, and that's really what makes Document AI so powerful. Human in the loop, I won't go too much into detail. You can set it up very easily via here as well. So I hope that gives you quite a good idea of the value that Document AI can bring. So it's really meant to be a solution that takes an unstructured document and extracts structured information. Whatever you do with that is added value, but that's up to you to provide, right? So there are many startups or scale-ups I know that are using Document AI, for example, and then build their own solution around it. It's really valuable. It's a space that's kind of underutilized, and also for Google, it's a very strategic space that they are investing in. And for us as a partner, we see a lot of interest in it as well. Cool. So that was my presentation. I'll now check if there are any questions in the room. Yes, sir.
I know you didn't want to show the human in the loop, but
okay.
The question I more had was, is there a UI
Yes.
that is not for the developers, but more for the people that are analyzing the document?
Yeah, so I don't have that set up right now, but basically the way it works is it gives you this view, very similar to this view, but you just get an edit button or, for example, a delete button. So you can see this, you hover over the bounding box, you say edit delete, and it also has an add button, and then you just draw a bounding box on your screen, here for example, and I can say, okay, this is the purchase address.
So there's a somewhat pre-made URL. So
exactly. So
send to the
yes.
business units to already perform.
Exactly. So you can see here, when you go here to the human in the loop, you basically create a labeler pool. And that labeler pool gets a specific UI associated. Yeah, of course, it's not configured here. I'll check if I have one that does have it. Because it does take a little bit to provision, not dramatically long, but still. And they basically get a notification. Yeah, so for example, I go here. But yeah, the worker pool has been deleted as expected in a demo environment. Yeah, you get a link it goes in there, and that's the similar UI as you just saw. Okay, cool. Any other questions?
That's in case you choose to do the human in the loop inside your company, not.
Yes. Well, if you do it outside of your company, you still get. You can see there's 2 URLs here. One is for the manager of the pool, and one is for the specialists, as they are called. You can still go to the manager console, but the specialist pool, well, you can visit it and you can do stuff in it, but there is a Google team that is normally going to do the specialist pool. But that requires a bit of an agreement with Google as well, because it's not their normal business to do that kind of resourcing. So it's something that they do, but it requires a bit of conversation with them to just check the way it's supposed to work. Because then you also need to provide, for example, instructions, which we have not done here. So they'll probably not know what to do, but you also can say like, hey, for our business, this is something specific we want you to enable.